Beware, citizen, you are now departing from the world of allowable opinion. The Tom Woods Show.
Welcome, everybody, on this Thursday, October 24th, 2013. Tom Woods here. We're going to talk about John Maynard Keynes today. We're going to give you the quick 20-minute overview of what did he think and what was wrong with it. And then, of course, we'll give you some information as to how you can find out more, because maybe 20 minutes isn't enough for you. If you're a fanatic like me, we got the answer for that. We're joined today by G.P. Manish, M-A-N-I-S-H. gpmanish.com is the website. GP is assistant professor of economics in the Sorrell College of Business at Troy University, and he is also a member of the Manuel H. Johnson Center of Political Economy at the university. He holds a Ph.D. in economics from Suffolk University, and I got to know him when I was in residence at the Mises Institute, and the guy is so smart, it is ridiculous. Ridiculous. So I decided, when I started up, at least in the second year of LibertyClassroom.com, and I wanted to do a course on Keynes, I thought, well, how about the guy who seems to me to be the most knowledgeable that I can find, knows so much, and somehow can also squeeze in the time to record an entire course on the Keynesian system first, and then a critique of the Keynesian system, none other than G.P. Manish. So very glad right now to welcome G.P. to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
I had you on the Peter Schiff Show some time ago, and we talked about Keynes, and I sort of feel like you can't talk about Keynes too much, especially in the current environment. So
yeah, that's true.
Sometimes you hear economists say that for a long time, for decades, we actually thought Keynesianism was more or less dead. Like, you don't really... You can see the textbooks evolve away from it in the 80s and 90s, and then now it's back with a vengeance. Can you explain, Can you account for that?
Well, there are many reasons for that. To a large extent, I think one of the big reasons is that even though a lot of the conclusions or some of the policy prescriptions of Keynesians and Keynesian economics kind of went into the background, but the conceptual framework of the Keynesian economics, of the general theory, remained. And so because of that, when you had this crisis of 2008 hit, and given the fact that lots of people were searching for answers, because of the fact that the essential concepts used have stayed the same, I mean, these concepts were largely developed by Keynes, some of the answers given also, went back to what were given at the end of the Great Depression. Well, that, I think, is one of the biggest reasons for the relapse.
What was it exactly that Keynes was saying about the market economy? He wasn't just saying, if there should, by some strange fluke, happen to be a depression, then you have to follow these policy prescriptions. He was talking more about the market economy in general. In other words, he was making broader claims. So if you had to narrow it down to one or two claims, what is it that Keynes is saying about a market economy?
Well, he's essentially saying that it's inherently unstable, firstly. And because, of the fact that it's so affected by people's psychological propensities, Keynes' famous consumption function, so how much people are willing to expend on consumption or investment, and these things are very unstable. And so because these consumption and investment expenditure are both so unstable, therefore the market economy is inherently kind of unstable in the sense that it's kind of always wavering between, it could reach full employment or high employment, or it could just, completely spiral down into an chronic unemployment situation. And then there are no forces inherent in the market to get it out of that kind of funk of depression and low unemployment. So essentially, he wasn't necessarily just making a claim about any one historical period. He was making a general claim about markets, and his claim is basically that markets can remain in a depressed state for a long period of time and can always lurch into it just without any warning.
Can you explain what the term animal spirits means? Because sometimes I think Keynesians feel like they're being caricatured and not treated fairly because people are not accurately explaining it. They're just saying that animal spirits are just this psychological factor that we can't really account for, but that plays a substantial explanatory role in the Keynesian system. Are people being unfair to Keynes in the way they describe animal spirits, and what are animal spirits?
To some extent, maybe. I mean, any economic term which becomes popular can get caricatured. But really, Keynes's whole discussion of animal spirits comes in his discussion of long-term expectations. And so what the way I understand the term and the way he uses it is essentially as a substitute for any kind of rational decision making. So Keynes's essential point being that, when you have a very capital-intensive economy, then because of that, long-term expectations play a huge role in entrepreneurial decision-making. So, for example, if you're going to invest in a steel mill or something like that, it has a lifespan of 15 to 20 years. How can you possibly expect or form expectations about things which could affect the value of your investment over 15 to 20 years? And so given that fact, there is really no rational basis for making any entrepreneurial investments in these long-term projects. And so people kind of just fall back onto these animal spirits, just these spirits, these irrational kind of random expectations, etc., of future possibilities. And then, of course, for Keynes, there is also the question of the herd mentality on the market, in that if a few people do, X, then a lot of others are just going to follow, like fish swimming in the ocean, all doing the same thing, etc. And that again essentially makes for a very unstable investment environment, and so that means that there's going to be, the same problems of instability on the market.
What does he recommend as a way of coping with animal spirits? Is there any way to do that?
Well, he really doesn't recommend any way. He doesn't believe the market. That this is one of his points to say that essentially the market is unstable, because investment expenditure, or the amount that entrepreneurs will spend on various investment projects, is because of these animal spirits are just going to be completely unpredictable and totally random. And so because of that, employment is going to fluctuate with that, because there's just going to be no demand for employment in these investment industries. Now, the only solution he kind of provides is, of course, right at the end, I think, of general theory, where he talks about the socialization of investment, where essentially he says, well, we have to the government has to step in and essentially control the investment, the whole area of long-term investment. But then the question which arises is, why aren't people who are in government also ruled by animal spirits, right? I mean, just because you're in the government doesn't mean you somehow become superhuman. So in that sense, if you take Keynes seriously, there is really no solution. Though the market, he does have a solution in the form of the profit-loss mechanism, which Keynes, of course, didn't address.
Do you want to address it?
Oh, sure. I mean, one of the big problems with the conclusions Keynes derives from what he says is that because of the fact that people are, investors are ruled by animal spirits, the markets are going to be inherently unstable. And so because of that, essentially what you can conclude is that the allocation of, factors of production is not necessarily going to reflect any rationality, is not going to be, in line with consumer preferences. But what Keynes and even other people who use the concept of animal spirits, I think, seem to overlook is that, of course, there are certain entrepreneurs who are irrational, and there are certain entrepreneurs who make mistakes, but then there are others who succeed. So essentially, the profit-loss mechanism allocates the pool of available capital to those entrepreneurs who succeed. And of course, those who succeed and make profits are the ones who have guessed correctly. So I think that even if you admit that, yes, investors could be, irrational in their decision making, you nevertheless don't have to therefore conclude that the market is going to be irrational in allocating factors or even in the level of expenditure. As long as you admit the fact, which is, I think, a basic empirical observation, that different people are differently able at predicting the future. So, Warren Buffett, for example, is far better than me at being an entrepreneur. And so that's why he has as much capital as he has, and I don't have much. And nor will I try, for example.
All right, now tell me if I'm wrong about this or if I've got the basic gist of it, and then I want you to elaborate on it. So Keynes's famous book, it begins with the words general theory, And
right.
So what he's saying here is that the classical economists had really, unbeknownst to themselves, been dealing with a special case. They had been dealing with a special case of full employment where all resources and labor are gainfully employed. He says, but that's only a special case. As you were indicating before, there's no reason to expect that the market economy will settle on an equilibrium like that. It could just, as you say, continue to dwindle and move downward in a spiral of unemployment. Now, if that's what he's saying, then why is he wrong to think that? Why is he wrong to think that the market is just as likely to be in that sort of unemployment or underemployment equilibrium? And why is he wrong to think that the market has no way of recovering from that?
Okay, so let me take both points you mentioned in order. So firstly, Keynes was wrong. In a sense, he caricatured economists before him. So for example, Stephen Cates has a book on Say's Law, where he talks about the fact that Keynes completely caricatures the economists before him, in the sense that he seems to, the way he presents what their arguments in the general theory, you would get the idea that they never even thought about what could cause recessions and unemployment, when of course this was completely untrue. They did have a theory of recessions and unemployment. Now to come to the second point as to why we would not expect the economy to settle in that kind of recessionary spiral or recessionary equilibrium, is simply because of the fact that on the market it's through price flexibility. That's how markets recover. So essentially, as Austrian economists and even others have argued, that at the end of a bust, when the boom turns into a bust, you need price flexibility to reallocate resources, back in line with consumer preferences, because what the boom represented was a misallocation of resources, which in turn was caused by, meddling with the monetary, the amount of money in the system, and the creation of, fiduciary media, as Mises would call it, and therefore, due to this mechanism of price flexibility, and especially the actions of entrepreneurs, who are always, of course, looking to make profits, and therefore always trying to appraise the future, and always trying to move resources back to, align with, in a way that is in line with consumer preferences, we would expect the market to, use up resources to the best available way and to the best available level.
Let's talk a little bit about a common claim that we hear Keynesians make to this day about idle resources, and they'll say that when you have an economy like we have now, and you have all these production facilities that are lying idle, and factories, and not to mention individuals, laborers who are idle and not producing anything, then surely there can't be any reason not to favor some type of stimulus from the government side that would activate these idle resources into activity once again. Like, in other words, you would have to be some type of free market ideologue to think, no, it's better not to kickstart the idle resources into play. Let's just sit here and let everybody suffer. That's the way a lot of popular Keynesian renditions will put it. So what say you?
Right. 2 points on this. Firstly, it's hard to even recognize what is idle in terms of economically idle. So to give you an example, if a manufacturer has a machine and he chooses, for example, to not use it in certain times of the year when he thinks the demand for his product doesn't justify it, but nevertheless chooses to use it in more intensively at other periods of time, we cannot say that the machine was idle when he chose not to use it. Economically speaking, of course, physically, it was idle. Similarly, for example, if someone, closes his hotel for, let's say, 2 months of the year, you cannot say economically that resource is idle. And this point was made by William Hutt in his book, The Theory of Idle Resources, in that just by looking at a resource, it's not really possible to conclude that it's economically idle, that it's not serving some purpose in the plans of some entrepreneur. That's the first point. Now, of course, having said that, in the midst of a recession, one could argue that lots of these resources that are lying there unutilized are in fact economically idle, in the sense that they are not really being utilized in any plan of any entrepreneur, in any production process, in any kind of economically rational manner. But then what but just having, concluded that they're idle doesn't necessarily mean that the cause of it is some market-led phenomenon, right? You could argue just the same that these resources are idle because of interferences into a market phenomenon or market processes, and like I said before, at the end of when a boom turns into a bust, if you do intervene very widespread, large-scale manner into the market economy, then of course, you could argue that all of this idle resources is caused by such interferences into the price system. So just acknowledging that some resource is idle, however hard it might be to identify, firstly, and Keynesians just use the term idle resources in a very unscientific manner sometimes, but even accepting the fact that they are idle, you don't have to conclude, therefore, that somehow the markets are to blame.
So, of course, you have to ask the question, why are the resources idle? What's the cause of this? And now, also, with regard to your first point about understanding the difference between physically idle and economically idle, I don't know who it was who gave this example, but this is an example from consumer goods just to help people because it's a more familiar type of example. Imagine a clothing store and there's a display of men's dress shirts and they're all priced at $100 per shirt, and they're not really being purchased. Now, at any time, they could drop the price of those shirts to $1 a shirt. They would clear away all those shirts. So, in other words, could we say that those shirts are idle when they're set at $100, or rather is it that the person who wants to sell them is waiting for an opportunity? He thinks that in the future things will be better for him if he keeps the price at $100 and he waits for a mutually advantageous transaction to take place, and that's what's going on a large scale in the wake of a bust following an artificial boom in the Austrian business cycle tradition. Am I right?
Right. I mean, you're right. You could also make the same argument not only about clothes in a store, but even the clothes in your own house. Like how many jackets do we all own? But how many do we wear every day? Do we rent the rest out? We don't, because we expect we get utility by just having the jacket available to wear anytime we might expect it. Similarly, an entrepreneur, like in the example that you gave, is choosing to keep that dress shirt or whatever the product might be and reserve it and not sell it at any price below that $100 because he expects people to have to be able to pay that $100. Now, of course, like as I mentioned before, because of the fact that entrepreneurs have different capabilities, you would expect some of these guys to get it right and some of them to get it wrong. And of course, you would expect the ones who get it right repeatedly to be the ones who are successful on the market. And that's how the market rationally allocates resources. So, of course, entrepreneurs can make errors, right? So the guy who prices his clothes at $100 might be wrong. He might be, as Keynesians claim, acting on the basis of some irrational animal spirits. Well, then he'll be outcompeted on the market.
Now, GP, you're originally from India, and
yes.
you moved to the United States how many years ago?
About 5 years ago.
Okay, and how did that happen? Like, you learned about Austrian economics in India, and you thought the best place to pursue it was the U.S., and your wife also has a Ph.D. and is a professor of economics. So just tell us, how does something like that happen?
Well, I was doing my master's in economics in India, and at that time, the library of the institution I was in happened to have books by Mises, Rothbard, Hayek, and all the other Austrian economists. And I was dissatisfied with the economics that I was learning, and I happened to stumble upon those books, and then I happened to stumble upon Mises.org on the web, so I got an access to many more books. And then I decided to pursue my PhD along with my wife, who was also interested in these ideas along with me. And we happened to get scholarships to study at Suffolk University with Ben Powell, who is a student of Peter Bettke's from George Mason University. So in a sense, it's a lot of luck involved in being here right now.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're here, and of course I was on the panel that examined you when you were engaged in the oral exam at the end of the Mises University summer program, and of course we were all thinking, this guy should be on the other side of the table administering the exam, not taking the exam. And so I thought to myself, if you can't beat him, join him. And I thought, I want a course on Keynes for libertyclassroom.com, because I think a lot of people who are libertarians, let's say, they kind of know a little bit about Keynes, but a real Keynesian would just clean their clocks, because they actually know all the lingo.
Yeah.
They know what the consumption function is. They understand animal spirits and all that. So I thought, well, I want somebody who's going to explain Keynesianism from ground zero up, and then at the end give the critique of it. So I look no further than you. So in our closing minute, can you describe what would somebody learn by taking your libertyclassroom.com course on the economics of Keynes?
Well, like you mentioned, Tom, what they'd learn first and foremost is the Keynesian economic, basic structure of the Keynesian argument. In order to criticize somebody, you have to understand what they said first of all. And that's what the first objective of the course is, that to introduce everybody to Keynesian economic jargon, the basic concepts involved. How does Keynes define consumption expenditure, right? What is the consumption function? How does Keynes define what investment expenditure is and what determines that? And then how do all of these concepts, interact with each other as presented by Keynes, and then explain this kind of recession, a permanent chronic recession on the market. And at the end, I attempt to give a few or make a few critical points, especially regarding Keynes's criticism of the necessity of savings from an Austrian perspective, and that's how I round off the course. So essentially, what people would get would be a good grounding in solid Keynesian economics, as well as a critical look at it at the end.
Well, I'm deeply grateful to you for doing that, and I think probably I should give you one more minute to say something about Troy University and the Johnson Center, because there are certain institutions people think of when they think, well, I'd like to learn free market economics, so Grove City College and various other places, and they don't think about Troy University, but maybe they should.
Absolutely. It's because we're relatively new compared to places like Grove City, Loyola, and New Orleans, and Hillsdale. But we have a center here called the Manuel Johnson Center. I'm a member of it. We have 7 other free market scholars along with me, so that's 8 in total. We have a new economics major. And essentially, we teach free market economics. We're all interested in free markets, all influenced by Austrian economists. There's a heavy dose of all of that stuff in our curriculum. And so young students should definitely look at Troy University to get their econ major to study free market economics, definitely. Hopefully, more and more bright young minds will choose Troy, and our reputation will grow.
Tell us where Troy is, and also how far away is it from the Mises Institute? Oh,
yeah, and Troy is of course, in Troy, Alabama, which is in southeast Alabama, but it is just about an hour and a half, for a drive from Mises Institute. So just an hour and a half long drive from Auburn. And so students can get an opportunity to drive down and meet everybody at the institute as well whenever they like, attend all the summer events, etc. We also encourage students to go to all the other summer events, for example, organized by FEE, which is in Atlanta now, which is also not too far away, just about 2.5, 3 hours away, and other organizations.
Well, it sounds great, and I'm thrilled that you and your wife both have the opportunity to teach there, and I'm equally thrilled that you had time today to talk to us about Keynes and give us the basic overview, but people who want to know the full thing, like the systematic overview, so they can smash all the bad guys. Not that maybe these are nice people, right? They should take your course at Liberty Classroom.
Absolutely, Tom. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. GP Manish, thank you so much. All right, my thanks to GP Manish, but don't turn off the podcast. First of all, make sure and visit GP at his website, gpmanish, M-A-N-I-S-H, gpmanish.com. But I've saved a really interesting item for the very end of the program here. And here it is. Now, this is something that just occurred the other day, and I posted it at my personal site, tomwoods.com, and it's a note from a listener. And the listener in this note is referring to the podcast from Monday. So today's the 24th, so I guess that would have been the 21st. And he's saying this: I just wanted to thank you for yesterday's podcast, the Mises Lecture, which is a talk that I gave at a Mises Institute event some time ago. He says, particularly the line regarding how any time the government promises the people something, the unspoken end of the sentence is, with a gun. I work for the IRS. I'm not specifically involved in collections or harassment. When someone who isn't being audited sends in an overdue return, it goes through me for the initial check. I've struggled with ideological issues from day one, but at the time it was the only way I could put food on my table. Nonetheless, I've always been uncomfortable with it, yet I kept plugging away because it was a comfortably miserable rut to be in. Your lecture yesterday crystallized things for me. I don't want to be the president's gun. I have to escape. Thank you for helping me to clarify this for myself, and the best of luck to you and your growing family. Well, it's just astonishing to get a note like that, and I'm deeply grateful for that. And also for the shout-out to the growing family thing. For those of you who don't know, what he means is that we have child number 5 coming in March 2014, and that is an indication to you guys, by the way, that my wife and I are going to win the battle of ideas through sheer numbers. And by the way, please don't forget, if you are in the Cincinnati area, please, 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 November 11th, I'm going to be at Miami University in Ohio, and I would love to see you. I think it's going to be fun because I'm going to give one rip-roaring speech. I'm basically going to give the overall case for libertarianism, and it's going to be no holds barred, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Then November 20th, at lunchtime, I am speaking about the constitutionality and history of secession at St. Louis University Law School, and then I'm speaking that afternoon at Lindenwood University. And then finally, the Spokane thing unfortunately didn't work out, but instead, it looks like we are trying to finalize 2 events in Idaho, one in the northern part of the state and one in Boise for early December. So I'll keep you posted on that. The details on all these events are available at tomwoods.com/events. Don't forget, please check out libertyclassroom.com. GP Manish is as good as it gets, and he takes you from knowing zero to knowing all this lingo that you can go up one side of your friends and down the other. If you really want to understand this, not just in sound bites, but really, really want to understand it, then check out libertyclassroom.com. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks so much for listening.
The Tom Woods Show.